and we're so happy to have you join us. My name is shar-day Campbell, and I'm the Enrollment Communications and Social Media Manager for HTC. I'm the moderator for this session. Before we kick things off, I want to share that this session is being recorded for playback and that the Q&A option will be enabled for you to submit questions. We'll have time, we will save time to address your questions verbally from the panel. And our student life team will also be addressing any questions and answers in the chat that will need to be answered immediately. I want to reiterate that this is a safe space. We welcome your feedback and your thoughtful questions and consideration. Today, I have an amazing panel joining me. I have an amazing panel joining me, and sitting next to me, I will introduce this person. On the back end today, I want to make sure I call out that we have an amazing support system in our student life coordinator, Dominique Brown, and Jim Jackson from IT. Sitting next to me is Tammy Campbell. She's an award-winning activist, founder of the Honey Brown Hope Foundation, a national NAACP Image Award winner for her community service, former NAACP Texas State Education Chair, and the first female president of the NAACP in Missouri City. I also have Dr. JOYE Carter. She was an African American to be appointed as a chief medical examiner in the United States. She was Houston's first Black chief medical examiner, and she was the independent medical examiner for the Sandra Bland case. She's also an author. We have SECUNDA Joseph, activist and co-founder of ImagiNoir and Black Lives Matter HTX. Which is a woman-led, local collective of scholars, organizers, activists, artists, and strategists who aim to educate, empower, and build a coalition in order to address the issues impacting Black lives in Houston. We have Desmond Lewis, who is our HTC faculty president, an award-winning educator, and an author. We have Aswad Walker, who is an Africana Studies scholar, associate director of the Urban Research and Resource Center at Texas Southern University, minister of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, journalist for the Defender Network, which is a Black newspaper in Houston. And on top of all of that, he has 6 kids. He wanted me to make sure that I reiterated that. Again, this event is to commemorate Juneteenth. So I'd be remiss if I didn't call out the significance of the holiday and connect some history for you. Juneteenth commemorates the freeing of slaves in Texas, which happened 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. So 1865, 2 years after the decree from Abraham Lincoln, slaves were finally freed in Texas. It was declared a state holiday from Representative Al Edwards, who recently passed away this year. HTC's district and central campus are 1.2 miles from Emancipation Park. The land from Emancipation Park was purchased by a church founded by Reverend John Jack Yates. Yates was an emancipated slave who purchased land in Freemanstown in Houston's Fourth Ward area. Jack Yates High School was named in his honor. George Floyd was a graduate of Jack Yates High School. This sets the tone for why Juneteenth is a call to action for everyone to stand for freedom, justice, equality, and specifically anti-racism. Today, we have critical thinkers who match their words with their action. And because what we need now is action, and I've talked enough. So I want our panel to talk about what actions need to be taken and what that would look like. So to my left, I introduce someone who, if you haven't noticed, is my mom. Mom, what does activism look like for you?
Well, I first would like to thank you as the student life staff for initiating this needed conversation. Free to breathe, free to be, free to breathe. I can recall the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. At last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. 50 years later, and we are still fighting the same injustice that he fought for and activists before him fought for. So at the Honey Brown Hope Foundation, I just want to share with you what we do every day to start the initial contact with police through our school to prison pipeline, which students are called in the principal's office. The principal then calls the police, who the students are questioned without any representation. So what we do is that we try to provide assistance for parents to know what to do when they encounter this type of situation. First of all, to make sure that their children aren't speaking to anyone without their permission and without them being there, and also providing them with step-by-step process in terms of what they can do to stop the school to prison pipeline.
So activism for you looks like addressing the school to prison pipeline, and you found that space. Aswad, what is activism for you?
Well, to connect it to Juneteenth is a reminder that white supremacy, whether in the form of enslavement, convict leasing, voter suppression, police brutality, this spat of lynchings that we've seen across the nation over these past few weeks, the stealing of millions of acres of land from Black farmers, the destruction of Black cities, communities, business districts, all these in education funding, all of it is all about power and control. And those who kept our ancestors enslaved only released them after they felt the compelling hand of 2,000 troops coming into Texas when the general read that article number 3 that gave birth to what we now call Juneteenth. And as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. So Juneteenth reminds us that we have two choices. We can either form a compelling hand and not ask or beg, but force our total freedom and equality, or we can shut the hell up and accept inequality and second-class status in a country that we built, a country whose global power that we made. And so option 2 really is an option. Activism to me looks like creating that compelling hand. And by that, I mean joining an organization. We all have to connect with organizations that are out there doing. Once you connect with that organization, you do you. Whatever your passions, your skills, what have you, do that. If you have the spirit to speak truth to power and march in the streets, do that. If you have the resources to be able to fund and support organizations, do that. If you can mentor or if you can teach, do that. If you can write public policy that makes sense for all people, then do that. That's how we build a compelling hand. It's not by begging. It's not by, receiving these symbolic gestures of freedom and peace. It's a compelling hand that says we are not going to stop. We're not going to rest until we get all that we deserve. We're in two struggles. One, to fight for the rights that we are supposed to have as citizens. But number 2, if we don't get those, we still got to take care of our own business. So we've got to also be in the fight to build self-determining institutions. So that if we don't get those things, we still have our needs taken care of. But it's building a compelling hand. They've got to be able to feel us saying that we are not going to take it anymore.
Yes. And I want to acknowledge, thank you for that, Aswad, that we are right around 8 minutes and 46 seconds into this event. It was 8 minutes and 46 seconds. George Floyd died from sustained pressure on his neck from a police officer's knee. And I want to pause and emphasize and take a pause and invite Dr. Joy Carter, a medical examiner, who can center us in what 8 minutes and 46 seconds of pressure on that neck looks like, to center us in that loss of humanity. Dr. Carter?
It only takes 3 to 5 minutes for irreversible change to occur when somebody compresses the vessels of the neck that allow blood to flow in and out of the brain. 3 to 5 minutes for an adult. Past that 5 minutes, it's irreversible change. And what happens is brain swelling. In an attempt to get oxygen that the central nervous system needs, it revs up the heart and lungs, increased blood flow, which then compresses the vessels to the brain. Brain swelling, brain herniation, cessation of life-giving breath, heart rate, function, loss of bladder and bowel control, irreversible change. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, way too long. Irreversible change, death.
I asked you to do that yesterday, and you're sharing with me, or I'm hearing this for the first time, and it's just who would hit the core of my soul. The very core of my soul. And I'm sure, you know, beyond seeing the headlines, we have to realize the gross miscarriage of justice, the lack of humanity, the dehumanization to do what you do to an animal. It's the source of our outrage as an African American community. And for those that stand with the African American community, it's disheartening, although the African American community is remaining cautiously optimistic about the movement that this moment is making. But we're weary of our lives being reduced to hashtags. And when we think about activism and what it looks like now, there's digital activism that is happening from a broad standpoint. But to kind of give some context around what digital activism really looks like and what happens after you post, I'd like to invite SECUNDA Joseph, who has executed a significant amount of digital activism. SECUNDA?
Thank you, shar-day. And I also just want to thank you for organizing this, inviting each of us into this space. And, you know, I'm glad to be having this conversation. Dr. Swad Walker was my instructor at one time, and his words have always been like food for my soul. So I appreciate you, Dr. Walker. But digital activism, first of all, like activism to me is willingness, right? So are you willing? And if you're willing, what are you willing to do? Like what was said earlier, like you move based on what tools you have. And if that tool is, hey, yeah, I can get on social media, many of us can, then what, right? Then what do you do? Does it mean that digital activism is someone posting something and that's the work? Well, I don't know, sometimes, right? Sometimes that is an introduction to sharing some information. I read a article about the young lady who posted, unfortunately, the video of George Floyd, and what happened to him. And as much as I'm disgusted with the way we sort of consume Black death, I was reminded that before the video was released, the medical examiners, right, unlike our sister that we have here, had already said, and the officers had already said, like, unknown causes, right? He died from unknown causes. And as we know, in many cities, like, you know, if you don't see the video, it didn't happen, right? Police can say anything. So action and digital activism can look like word of mouth. Hey, y'all, did you see what happened? Right? Hey, y'all, this thing is happening with me, right? But it's also a call to action, right? And let me just take it back a little bit, because I think activism is one thing, right? Organizing is something different. Building and being in community is something different, right? So at your highest form, I think, of digital activism, what you are doing is you are doing what folks used to do before there was any type of digital anything, and you are knocking on your neighbor's door and say, y'all, look what happened, right? You're entering into that conversation, and then you're moving forward and you say, what we gonna do about it, right? Are we committed to this? How are we going to organize? You are building a relationship. You are learning together. You are getting the knowledge that you need. And you are also pushing other folks, right? But I think for me, in my experience with digital activism, it is not just me posting on on social media, right? It is also, one, it is building relationships with the people that we are talking to, right? And it is also going to my neighbors and going to maybe folks who not online, right? For folks of another generation who not getting most of their news from Facebook, from Instagram, from Twitter. And it's saying, hey, y'all, did y'all know this was happening, right? How do y'all feel about this? What do y'all think we should do, within this generation? How do you think we should move? So it is not a replacement for the way activism or organizing or community building has been happening. It is just the new era of the way we're doing it. It helps us to do it, I think, in a way, whereas I'm going too long, but I'm just gonna say one thing to bring it all together. What I'm reminded of is before 2015, right? Channel 13, if you're in Houston, Channel 11, Channel 2, they led the news story, right? Whatever they were talking about, it was trickled down to us, and then we began talking, right? What I've seen in 2015 is that the conversation began to shift, right? There were so many people engaging, right, with people that you knew who posted something online, sometimes people who look like you, right? Then what was happening is these news conglomerates, even national news stories, they begin to be like, they got the news late. The people were already talking. So now what you see in 2020, they always coming to us first, right? Even if the story starts in a particular way, that news story shifts. You'll see the news folks say, hey, let's bring in a different conversation, because this is what the people are saying. So I think just this digital activism or digital way of communicating has brought us in some ways to a level playing field. Yeah.
I agree. Thank you so much for that. And you touched a little bit about just how activism through digital media has evolved throughout history, and kind of reframed how we're able to frame our own narratives. But a lot of this starts with education. And when a lot of this happened, when it started to happen, when we had Ahmaud, when we had Breonna, and when we just said no more at George Floyd, one thing that came to mind, and what people were struggling to contextualize what was happening and what the next step should be, was that there wasn't a lot of foundational knowledge around a movement that already had happened. And that's the civil rights movement. and what happened beyond the marching in the civil rights movement, and the full scope of that history that is often abbreviated in curriculums. And so I think at this moment, and just as someone who works at an educational institution, that there is a huge opportunity for the foundation of the work to begin with education. So I want to invite Desmond to share how can educational institutions in this moment and going forward address that curriculum gap and help people contextualize what activism looks like and learn from other periods of history.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'll say is that there needs to be an alignment with the actual words and the work. So it starts with not necessarily just the conversation, but the follow-up, the classroom. Preparation plus opportunity equals success. We hear that all the time. But without that preparation, which starts not in college, but it starts from that first day you step inside of a classroom with your formal education, microaggressions, we know those exist. Students need to see exemplars of themselves from the beginning. And I hear many people on this panel talk about Texas Southern University. I too am a product of Texas Southern University, and I was also an instructor there, and my sister also is an instructor there. The motto of the institution is excellence and achievement. So you must continue to strive to change things. And as Dr. Walker was saying a moment ago, be unapologetically yourself. There are programs at Houston Community College that are being developed now. And we're working with programs such as the Miles Ahead program, where with high school students to bring them through all the way through college and partner in those type of ways. We also have a program in regard to that's more culturally responsive called Puente, where within the classroom, you have culturally relevant information that's being presented. In other words, if a person doesn't see himself or herself within the type of curriculum that's there, and you don't have that example and you don't have that interaction, then you have a gap is being formed and reinforced. As an African-American male, a Black man from Houston, from South Park, the Dead End to be specific, as you grow up, that you think that that's your world, that's your microcosm, and you don't expand outside of it. Where I live now in the Katy area, literally for the first 20 years of my life, I had no idea that this existed or this was attainable. When I say this, a different level of living and some of the accommodations that my kids have been able to access, because as a child, I didn't have those. Now, why? Why is that? That's a larger problem, but it starts with the education. It starts with going into the places to tell those individuals, those children, those parents, making sure they are prepared to help their children and the next generation become successful. So those opportunities, it's incumbent upon each and every one of us with an earshot to go out and pick up the phone when that call of action has been made. Now, I myself, I have individuals who come to me all the time, and I don't talk a lot about what I do. I do it. And let me say that again. I do very, very little talking unless I'm asked. Otherwise, I'm just out moving around. Now, we do need those voices, like Secunda was saying a moment ago, that the next generation, that's how you relate to one another. And you, shar-day, I'm very proud of what you've done. And I'm telling to your mother, she is a great young lady, and very, very, very accomplished. And I will do anything I can to support her. And I say this again to anyone out there. And I've said this on several panels this week. One of the things that I have learned is that if you have the right backing, you can go anywhere. So I tell each and every one of my students and everyone who's listening to this, if you need my help, call me. At HCC, there are students that walk around that say, Uncle Dez. Now, these students aren't just African American, they're of all ethnicities. And why do I tell them that? At Texas Southern University, it was ingrained in me to have the backs of those who are trying to achieve. And again, that excellence and achievement, if you know and you build that sense of belonging, then all of these things belong to you, including that education. So again, the curriculum in the classroom, and as Dr. Walker said, it doesn't start with asking, it starts with doing, demand. You demand, you change, and things move forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. Good word. Demanding change. I think, I want to invite one goal that an outcome I want of this discussion, I think a lot of people are critical of discussions, but discussions facilitate the knowledge transfer where those gaps exist. Discussions in the contact hours in the classroom, and it helps people get that context of activism looks different. Everybody has their role, right? Everyone can bring their gift. And when we think about, and Secunda talked about this, about the medical examination that initially didn't declare that there was foul play. And so if we just 100, in the words of my generation, the same municipalities that pay police departments pay medical examiners from the county and those municipals. So we need soldiers in every system to respond. And so that independent medical examination that had to happen for George Floyd had to happen for Sandra Bland, for foul play to be declared. And so I want you all to know that your gifts add value and that there's an opportunity. And so I want to invite Dr. Carter to share what she has been, what does activism look like for her in the medical space that arguably is facing its own reckoning with systemic racism. Dr. Carter?
Well, hello again, and I'm going to give a shout out to Howard University and all of our HBCUs, because we need everybody together pulling. And I'm going to speak from another generation. When we did the Million Man March, it was a grassroots organization. It was spread by word of mouth. Back in 1996, people said Black folks were not on the information highway, but we were getting there. And that group accomplished something. It was word of mouth. It was city to city. It was regionalization. It was put down your titles, put down your income, and come together as people of color. And what's going on now that's different from back then is the fact that now we are on that highway. In fact, we are leading the chase. We have documentation. I tell everybody, from a health standpoint, your mental health, your physical health, don't leave home without your phone. The world has seen and witnessed what happened with Mr. Floyd. You can't say it didn't happen. There's documentation. And unlike the civil rights movement of the 60s, we're getting it firsthand. When we had the small groups gathering, we didn't have enough people because no one knew what was going on, and mass media was framing what other people saw across the country. So we have an opportunity to frame it in the context of which it is. This has to be a sustained movement, and it needs to end up with voting to make things change. Voting as to who your municipal judges, justices of peace, school board, to make sure our children have a proper education. This week, people are just finding out what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, because it's not in the history books. And all the other areas where Black people have been overtaken and slaughtered from greed of other Americans. So we have to educate, we have to motivate, we have to sustain, we have to come together and drop all these false things we put up and separate us, because together a spider web can take down an alligator.
Yes.
She just took us from multi-generational, and one thing that's coming up a lot is framing narrative. Secunda talked about it from a digital activism standpoint. Dr. Carter talked about it. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about journalism's role in this moment. People are struggling with identifying the integrity of the news that they are receiving. And this dates back to Ida B. Wells, who was a journalist, investigative journalist, who kept a log of the lynchings in America. And fast forwarding to the media and the evolution of it from a digital media standpoint, but we still have Black platforms in Houston. Aswad Walker works for the Defender Network, that is a newspaper. We have the Forward Times, we have Houston Style Magazine, we have KCOH, which is one of the longest Black running radio stations out here in Houston. So framing our narrative is so vitally important in this moment, because we see how the news cycle plays out. And part of our exasperation is that the humanity of the coverage after the dehumanization happens isn't there. And so I just want to make sure that we call that out. It's critical about the intersection of these historical moments. And so we had to, if you look at this panel, there's multi-generational activists on this panel. And so I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about education. What tools should people be looking at in this moment for activism? What do you rely on for your next steps? And I want to go to my mom.
Well, thank you, shar-day. I want to go back when, if you saw a community child doing something, the community was responsible for that particular child. They told the parents, and they gathered together to see what they can do. So this is just the social media is just an advancement of what we've had all the time. So we got to make sure that we are using the tools that we already have in place. What I was saying earlier about the Honey Brown Hope Foundation and what we do at the start of the injustice, of the encounters that parents and children have with the so-called justice system. We not only provide them with information, we advocate for them. We also enlist the community and what they can do. You're talking about forming co-op groups in that school where when I go to lunch, I don't only look after my child or my grandchild, but every child in that co-op. And so you can have those small co-ops to deal with what's going on in the school, because believe me, our children are being taken out at an early age where they can't get a job, where they are not being able to be productive citizens in the end. Now, other things that we have in place, Dr. Carter mentioned all the avenues in terms of voting. We got the district attorney's office. How can we hold those police officers accountable that have done wrong even before they go in for the kill? You got a list that's called the Brady list that we can demand for our district attorney to post misconduct of police officers on that Brady list. Now that Brady law is in place for defendants to have a chance at a just trial. So, but before we get to that point, we can stop these police officers, road police officers, because if they're put on that Brady's list, they their whole career is put at risk. And a district attorney or prosecutor doesn't have to rely on their testimonies when they come up to testify in terms of what has happened at a crime scene and covering up what has happened and lying and protecting their brother in blue. So there are things that we already have in place. We don't, all these things in terms of making new laws and all of that, the laws are made. We got to hold the particular entities accountable. And in holding the entities accountable, we got to hold ourselves accountable. It's now at the point of accountability.
That's real good, Mama. I think people need to realize a lot of, because we've been dealing with this for centuries and for our generation, decades, We want one big solution. We want to hit that button at a federal level and then make all the states and the counties and the municipalities get in order. But the reality is that we are facing the need for sustained movement at a hyper local level. So she talked about district attorneys. So it's only a few entities that can release police footage. That's district attorney, the mayor, and police chiefs. Now there's different models in cities. Sometimes the police chief is appointed, sometimes they are elected. It's under and you have the sheriff on the county side. We have to understand our own systems, right? So when we talk about systematic racism, what are the systems that we really need to be targeting, right? And a lot of that and what's coming out and re-rising to the national consciousness of urgency is voting. But people struggle with who to vote for, how to find out about those particular elected officials. And I want you all to be looking out for HCC Students Life upcoming events. They are dedicated to voter empowerment and registration going forward. And I want to, when we start talking about systems and tools, Dr. Walker, you at Texas Southern University, you are part of an urban research center that puts together tools and research, and you also are a journalist. You wear many hats. Where are these tools that people can tap into to figure out what their next steps are?
The tools are everywhere and all around us. We have a rich array of resources in our communities. These brilliant sisters and brothers who are on this panel are resources. Their communities and the organizations that they're part of are resources. I want to go back to something you said earlier, because you talked about how Ida B. Wells was a journalist and an activist. I find it interesting that not only her, Marcus Garvey was a journalist with the Negro World. Malcolm X was editor of the Nation of Islam's paper before it became the Final Call. W.B. Du Bois with the Crisis magazine. And so change world demands change people. We can't change the world unless we are changed first. We need organization. We need to be part of groups, movements, entities that are unashamedly, unapologetically about the business of taking care of Black business so that other folk are trying to take care of our business. We need the compelling hand of economic support or withdrawal, the compelling hand of political support or withdrawal, the compelling hand that arises out of our fellowship when we come together, when we seek radical self-care. But all of it starts with changed people, because changed people change people. Once you are changed and once you are growing, you invite others to do so. And it starts with education. Journalism is a part of that education. It's something that you read or something that you are exposed to on social media may inspire you to dig a little deeper. And so we change as individuals as we expose ourselves to new information, new knowledge, new experiences. And so that's why, when you said that thing about journalism, that really struck me. And so resources, one of those resources is not only the quote unquote book learning that you can get when you go to HCC and take Dr. Brown's class, or when you sit at the feet of this incredible sister here who is the medical examiner, or when you are blessed enough to be in the circles of Ms. Joseph. But education can take place in many forms, and one of the biggest, most powerful forms of education and those resources is just actually being out there doing the thing. When Dr. Brown talked about he doesn't do much talking, it's action. Learn so much just by action, just by being it. And one of my mentors, former council person, Ed Edwards, he's fond of saying, no one can do everything, but if everyone does something, everything will get done. And so when you're out there trying to do your part, you can't do it all, but you can learn how to do your part better and better and better. And you can learn from other folk the great things that they're doing, and take a little piece from here, add to your repertoire, a little piece of here, add to what you do. But the resources are everywhere. And sometimes, or oftentimes, I think we make the mistake of, like, there's this saying that's becoming popular now. We are not our ancestors. I reject that notion wholeheartedly. We wish we were our ancestors. The nerve and courage that they had to stand up against powers and principalities, we wish we had that. And we can learn from that. In fact, one of the biggest resources that we have that we don't use is connecting to those ancestors. The way one minister, one doctor teaches at Manhattan College up in New York, the way he put it is, every time we walk into a room, there are more people there than just the seats that you see, because our ancestors are there. They're staying for us and with us, and they want so much for us. And they're asking for us to call upon them to help us in our struggles. And so, I mean, I don't want to get all metaphysical on you and all, but I got to go there. That's a huge, huge resource. You know, I'm preparing to preach a sermon this Sunday, reading the words of Marcus Garvey. Particular words always just take me out and move me. And that's his spirit that is still there, that still wants the best for you and your mama, your proud mother, still wants the best for Black people, still wants us to take care of our business for our people. We've got resources all over the place. I don't even know if that answered your question. But
it was rooted in passion. You answered a lot of questions. So when I think about, and we've talked about this interconnectivity, we've talked about the generation, we talked about the spreading of the word. There's an opportunity for us to learn from the success of what has worked and to scale it and to to configure it as a response for facing at a hyper local level. And Secunda, and I keep up with what she does. She talked a little bit about when we were preparing for this session, how they learned about how a district attorney who was not serving the needs of the community was unseated somewhere else, and they took that same tool and they brought it to Houston to advocate for a district attorney that served the community needs better. About benchmarking and learning and scaling success, Secunda, tell us a little bit about what's possible there.
I think one, you know, shout out to the folks in Chicago who gave us this idea in Houston, right? Where we can, you know, create a campaign, focus on a particular district attorney or DA that wasn't serving the needs of our people, right? And then intergenerationally work together, right? Outside of, in coalition work together, right? So we had to, it wasn't just like activists or organizers, right? There was also, you know, events created by artists, right? That spoke. There were mothers of folks who lost their children, you know, some right here in Houston, some across the country, to police violence, right? Who spoke and draw attention, right? There was, you know, some folks on this line who created a safe haven for those who were going to be on the street marching to make sure that we were not arrested, right, on that particular day. There were like many things that happened. But I think even now, as I look at it and I think about, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about George Floyd and what happened in Minnesota, and we should be speaking about the death of folks everywhere, right? Of both men and women in this country who are killed by police violence. But I think we ought to really look at what's going on locally, right? How many people been killed by police violence in the city of Houston, right? How many times have we had the opportunity to see what was happening, right? Do you know? Right? Do you know what's going on in your city? So those are the kind of questions that I think no matter where you are, you ask yourself, what are the elected officials doing now? The city of Houston, we talk a lot about voting, but let me tell y'all, Black Houston, y'all came out, y'all voted. We voted, you know, a lot of judges out. Like, we voted the folks we wanted in. You know, we voted. We voted. And I don't think Black people get enough congratulations. We work so hard as a people. Hey, and we're always told about what we don't do. So you're not doing this, so you're not doing that. Work harder so you can do better. And we working just like our ancestors, right? We working to our bones that we have nothing left. But it just seems like things aren't working, right? We've tried reforms. Is that working, right? Has that worked? Have there been any reforms? So when you look at the things and when you're looking at where you are at success, you ask yourself, what's happening in my city? We've voted for cameras to take place, right? Is that preventing police violence, right? We got new people in power. Is that decreasing the violence? Are we still harassed, right? What is it, right? Is it voting for a certain party? Has that caused us, like, has it gotten us anywhere? So the first thing I say is you ask questions. And like Dr. Walker said, right, I always look to my ancestors. You mentioned Ida B. Wells, like, listen, if there's one ancestor that I pay attention to all day long, it's her. This sister, not only was she a journalist, but she decided that she was going to do the investigation on lynching. And she was going to use the tools that she knew, which she used white folks' newspapers, right? To see how many lynchings there was, where the lynchings happened, right? She went to towns where she could have lost her life, put in her own money and did that work. Right, she used what she knew to use, and she's an inspiration. I go back all the time to remind myself and to give myself encouragement on what to do, because a lot of the work I do is either radio or it's you know, drawing people in. It's, you know, using these places right now to give information, right? And I think we need that. And the last thing I think it's important to say is that, like, we talk a lot about, you know, how do we know we doing well? Right now, do you know what I'm looking at? I'm reading everything that happened with the Black Power movement, right? I'm reading things about Angela Davis, right? Because I'm hearing these words, abolitionist. I'm hearing police. I'm hearing all this language. And I'm like, where did this start, right? Did this start? Where did this start? Did Black Lives Matter start this? No. These ideas and these encouragements, or these, you know, directions, we got ancestors have already, right? Some of them still living. Angela Davis still here, right? Folks have already laid foundations for us. So if there's any, you know, thing that I'm encouraging folks to do right now, it is educate, educate, educate. And education does not necessarily start in the classroom. When you look at these different people, they'll tell you, like Lord, who I'm thinking of, Ruth Gilmore. Look her up. What is she talking about? Right? She is creating and have been all over the world where they're doing pop-up university. What does that look like for us to get in a room, and we may not agree, but go back and forth with one another until we come up with a solution, right? Yeah. Okay, so I went too long, but it's just one more thing I want to say, and that is, like, when we're trying to look and see what is working, the questions that we always have to ask ourselves is, what do we imagine for our community? What we have right now, is this what we imagine? Right? The way the police departments in our city, the way that it works, is this what we imagine for ourselves? When we voted the last time, did it yield what we wanted it to yield? What kind of choices did we have? Right? So I'm not satisfied with it. Right? I'm not satisfied that there have been 9 men killed, or women, I'm not sure, but 9 people killed, you know, in the city of Houston in the last 2 months. I'm not okay with that. And I've seen different, you know, people say, let's do this and let's do that. I haven't seen any ideas or any plans, right, that will solve those problems. So I don't have the answers. But maybe if we get together, right, maybe we begin to read together and take our time, maybe we can come up with that for the city. But
thank you. I just want to call out, you know, a lot of what you were saying and up is to not mistake visibility for action. To not mistake statements for action. You said that that education doesn't only start in the classroom. I would like to add that it doesn't end there either. And so that there's opportunities from the start of that pipeline out after the classroom that we can get involved. And I hope that we all recognize our role in that. And before we go to audience questions, I want to wrap out everyone is coming from a different perspective because they found their place in that activism, right? And so I want to invite, and I'll call on you, and what matters most next? I'll say it again. What matters most next? Well,
Accountability. You can't you can't move forward and continue the same thing in terms of voting for. What is that person's record? What does that person propose? All of these things, when you're looking at what are we doing and what can we do, we have to make sure that we are holding everyone accountable, including ourselves. When you're talking about activism, what can you do when your neighbors say to you, you know, I'm having a problem and I need help? Do you tell them just to call such and such a number, or do you help them research? Do you be there with them to try to resolve the problem? It starts one person at a time. We have got to stop thinking that we can go to one organization and get help. It is everybody working together and holding each other accountable.
thank you. Dr. Carter, what matters most next from your perspective?
From my perspective, what matters is unity. We have so many false barriers that allow the powers to be to continue to divide, and that allows that power to remain. And it also deals with how we see ourselves as worthy of being equal people. That starts in the home, and that extends beyond. You know, economics and unity, where we spend our dollar becomes important. That's an economic tool. It's a weapon that can be used. And we have to learn how to love ourselves, love our business, know our history, be unified as a group to have that respect and feel that we deserve the power.
It's real good, Dr. Carter. Swad, what matters most next?
I think Sister Joseph spoke to this, the concept of Sankofa, looking back in order to move forward, you know, looking back and taking the best of our past, the best experiences, knowledge, information, value systems, etc., so that we can move forward with power. One example of that is Dr. Benjamin Charlton's book. The book focuses on the legacy of late Congressman Mickey Lee. It talks about how he was an activist, Pan-Africanist, and he took that activist mindset into the halls of Congress. And so with that, their plan was, you know, you protest, you preach, you speak truth to power, but you have these study groups where people are learning, and you're also working with the politicians to form the policies that you want, but you're also working with the Black press to shape the narrative that you want. And so it's not thinking that any one thing is the whole answer. That book lays out what our people did and did successfully. So I think, you know, like SECUNDA said, there's so much that we can learn just from our past, our successes and our failures. And we got to celebrate our successes. We got to celebrate those successes. I think a big part of our future success comes in recognizing the great work that we have done and that we are doing. It's not just those big names, it's everybody that's done their part to push us at least one step closer to where we want to be and where I believe.
Thank you. Secunda, any what matters most next?
Ooh, I think what matters most next is for us not to move in haste, for us to acknowledge that we have power, right? And to begin asking questions, question everything. And I think if everything needs to be changed, then we decide, how do you pluck something out by the root, right? How do we not, you know, like, how do we get what is it that we really want, right? And then I think we ask ourselves, how do we get it, right? And in doing that, we have to be thinking about, I hate using that word have to, and doing that, like, it's important for us to think about all our people, right? It's important for us to not try to speak for one another necessarily, because I can call myself an activist. The organization is BLMHTX, right? Not Black Lives Matter Houston, it's two groups. So, but anyway, I can call myself an activist, but I don't speak for everybody, and I don't want to. You know, it's more important that we're all working these things out and coming to some kind of unified, you know, what everyone has been saying, unified, at least, you know, understanding about what's good for our people, because it's too many people experiencing different type of oppressions and suffering. I mean, the minimum of it is, you know, you talk about these microaggressions, but the maximum is death, and it's everything else in between. So I think all of our voices need to be at the table, as many as possible, as many as willing. And I think we really have to ask ourselves questions. What do we want, and what's best for us?
That's real good. Thank you. To wrap us out, what matters most next?
Well, I'll say this. Everything that everyone said, if you were to culminate that into one response, I think that's what matters. And I would say it through equity. Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an activist, she said, "You better learn to love, but you teach me to hate." Through empowerment, and again, self-empowerment, to be fearless and courageous and to believe in oneself will allow you to stop asking for help and to become that help. And if you're able to do so, you're able to transition from a point of subjugation to one of true empowerment. And that does have a lot of root to do with accumulation of wealth and information, and knowing that there's someone there to assist you. As Dr. Walker was saying, some of those points, is he being a journalist. My sister's a journalist. In fact, Dr. Walker, my sister is Sabino Sandra for Walker. Now, many people, I know his face is like, what? We act nothing alike. But at the same time, the example that she put forth in front of me many years, so she's a professor herself, allowed me to forge this path to where I am today. And along the way, there were my elders that were there, individuals who recognized things in me that I didn't. So it's incumbent upon each and every person, again, within earshot on this call, each one reach one. I mean, go out, touch them, grab them, pull them through. You're not successful unless they are successful. So again, the next step is to do something. Do what you can and be unapologetic and not be defined by someone else's expectations, but by those that you set for yourself.
Mighty words from a mighty panel. That concludes our moderated conversation. I'm going to go to questions. Chris has a question of what can we all do to get people to make an informed decision that's not manipulated by the news. We spoke a little bit about this. I'm going off of body language, so I'll go to Secunda because I know that you do a lot of work around getting the word out about what needs to be done or how people can get involved. Talk a little bit about those unconventional ways that people can get involved. You talked even about court watching too, so just throwing
yeah. So we again, we're talking about just thinking about how many folks have voted to change our judicial system in the city, right? And then in doing some work with some folks who had issues with the judicial system, right? We did a bailout campaign and just going to court with different folks. The injustice I saw, y'all, when I tell y'all, I got kicked out of the courtroom one time, but it was horrific. It was horrific for me, knowing the knowledge, knowing the stats, knowing the data, but going in that courtroom and watching what was happening to, a lot of times it's children, right? People who we would call children, and sometimes not. But it was so horrible, and I'm like, well, we voted, right? So from that, having conversations with folks around the country who are doing different things like court watching, this idea, me and one of, that we got from somebody else, right? Like this can be a tool, right? To maybe one, getting people together. It's something that we could all do. And it's a way to then, how do we hold the people that we voted accountable? But again, that's more work, right? Who can do that, right? And there was a question that we hadn't necessarily started that program yet, because boom, Corona, right, happened, and things changed. But I think that's one. I think that's one way. But I would say you can reach out to local organizations. Man, you can drop us BLMHTX, look at us and on Instagram. But there are many organizations, AMBUF, National Black United Front, Houston. Reach out to Dr. Walker on this line. There are ways that you can get involved, and it doesn't necessarily have to look like what you think it looks like. I hope I answered the question.
That's real good.
Okay.
Like you sometimes you got to see it, right? And you talked about learning from other organizations. Mom, as far as accessing and connecting to get, how do people learn about what's really going on in the community when they're worried about maybe what they're getting from the news isn't coming from a place of integrity?
Well, that's where we take the lead in terms of doing op-eds. And on a regular basis, I'm doing op-eds to get the word out, to educate, to inform with our back to school information that we share. How do you see, we are on the pulse of the violence committed against us from the police level, but we have got to get on a preventive type of scale where we are preventing these things from happening. And how do we do that? It starts in our own backyard in terms of what we can do, what everybody can do, and then what we all can do together to unite. But when we have a responsibility to get the word out, SECUNDA using social media, but we can also use our voice to navigate in terms of getting the information out there through op-eds. And we can use the newspapers and the radio stations and the phone calls. All of these things are what we have already in place. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of knowing your rights, the Brady Law, exculpatory evidence that you have a right to. Your attorney has the right to get that videotape of what transpired when you go to trial. We need to know our rights, because you can't effectively advocate for yourself if you don't know your rights.
That's real good. And I want to call out and not assume that people know this tidbit and why she's so passionate about the school to prison pipeline. In California and Texas, they build prisons based on how many third graders fail. There's a direct predictor that they are using to build prisons to prime, and disparaging disciplinary tactics and in the K through 12 system that is referring students to the criminal justice system, which means that families don't have the access to capital to even navigate the court system means that they end up with plea deals and records when other issues get handled at the campus level.
So they can't breathe.
So they get told at an early age that I can't move the same way, that I exist in this punitive world, and it affects the environment in which they learn, and it takes them out of the class, and it takes them out of classroom hours. I went on a little bit of a tangent because I'm connected to this work, obviously. But I think about how that fuels into the pipeline of college. And when we get these students at higher education institutions, we have to be mindful of what they faced all the way through K-12. We have to be mindful of how we serve them, knowing that they come from a marginalized place. A minority is a number, but marginalization is a barrier. And so we have to be deeply connected. So when you talk about learning about what can I know, these are the types to really understanding the systems that are creating that marginalization, that are choking our existence, even when our lives aren't being taken. And so when we think about how we're processing this, we had an event on Tuesday called Protect Your Peace, because what we're facing is a weariness and a hopelessness and an anger and an anguish. But we had to still continue with our lives. We still had to show up. We still had to go to work. And I've heard a lot of conversations about how people are struggling to put their game face on. And we have one in the chat that is asking, how would a faculty member who's the only Black person in their department articulate what they are experiencing, so that they feel like they belong in conversations and decision making? And I want to cut to Desmond for that.
Actually, I had already sent a message to them to reach out to me. But one of the things is to make yourself known, to make what's going on, there. You're not alone. I mean, as long as I'm here, you have at least one person to advocate for you. And I can say this with the administration, they have been backing the things that I put forth in regard to making things a lot more equitable across the board. So if you are the only person within your department, it can be distressing. I understand, and I am there with you. So I will tell to that particular person to reach out to me. But as a practice, if you are alone within a department, you have a hierarchical system within the department. You have your chair, the dean, so forth and so on. And then you're supposed to have talent engagement to protect certain things. But if you are experiencing any type of stress that's beyond the scope of what the classroom is there, what's taking place, again, please reach out to me. Let me find those resources. And again, this isn't just me saying I'm going to find some resources and as your mom was saying earlier, and move you on. No, I'm going to walk with you. And some of the individuals on the call who've been texting me while y'all keep seeing me look over here like this, they know that I'm not lying. And shar-day, you know that too. So if you reach out, I would do everything in my power, to make sure that your voice is heard and that it comes across in the class. Let me preface this too. There's a limit to what I can do, so I don't want to sit here and exaggerate the level of influence that I will be able to have, because it's going to also take you to help, and making sure that this is something that's sustainable. But again, it starts with knowing that you are not by yourself, you're not standing by yourself, and that the things that are taking place and how you feel, they're not imagined. And that's really important too, to acknowledge that, because sometimes when you are by yourself in the classroom on the faculty side, you may, and I'm sure many of my colleagues here at other institutions, sometimes you may start to think, am I losing my mind? No, you're seeing what you're seeing. And sometimes people want to relegate that to a moment. And that's much more than a moment when it's your actual experience. So again, I've emailed, just reach out to me through email and we'll get it started. That is if you're at HGC. If you're at some other school, still holler at me and I'll see what I can do. Okay.
My soul shouts yes. That's action. That's response. That's using your platform as your stage and your position to influence, and he's right. I think I don't even remember where I met Desmond. I just kind of rolled up and we connected, and I started asking questions. So we have another question. It says, how do we initiate our economic and financial power and knowledge as a means of activism for a next step? And look, Aswada's like, I got it, but I do want to cut to you, and I also want to allow Dr. Carter to speak on this because she talked about that financial power too. But Aswad?
I was just going to say, one of the things we need to do is support the local organizations, events, and programs that we have. We got a plethora of good people doing great work. But in terms of the economics, the Shrines by Black Marketplace was started 5-6 years ago for that specific purpose. Get Black people to facilitate Black people supporting Black businesses, Black entrepreneurs, not simply as a way to slap back at those businesses that don't care about our concerns, because we just need to support our own anyway. So that's one vehicle. Then there's the Black Marketplace. That's a whole nother movement, but it has the same spirit about it. So I just throw that out there. And even though I think we need to support the Community Center, they have the Elders Institute of Wisdom, NBUF, their Feed the Hood program. I know Derek Muhammad with the Nation of Islam, they have their Smart North Summit, Greater Houston Black Chamber. They have their business development workshops. Houston Area Urban League, NAACP, they all have their committees that work on the economic end of, I'm looking at me like here. Are we good? Anyway, I think supporting those efforts will help us economically as well. I just want to share.
Okay, I didn't know if you were adding something else. Dr. Carter, where do you think, how do we initiate our economic and financial power as a means of as a next step for activism?
Well, I've used a term for many years called ebonomics. This is from knowing who owns the businesses and how we can support them. And I think being able to use the media now, social media, is a great way to underscore who owns these businesses, local and national. You know, back in the 80s, when we were doing Black hair products finally on the market, we had a proud Black lady on the side of the container that you knew it meant Black owned. Little by little, cosmetic companies start buying these other companies up, and before you knew it, you were buying your favorite brand, but it wasn't Black owned. And we need to know where our money's going, so we can use social media to say this is a real Black owned business. Because if you look in our Black communities and you look at how little the Black dollar stays in the community, maybe as little as 6 minutes, as opposed to other groups that could be 6 months or 6 years, our money is pulled out of our community because we think we're buying Black, or we think we're buying something that is being marketed to us for other reasons. So we need to know who we are, what we're selling, and not only just in selling, but when we have Black elected officials, we need to let them know where we are, what we need them to do. We elected them, they will come to us, and we are giving them information they need to fight the fight on that greater scale. So we have to vote. We have to be in touch with our elected officials. They need to know what our problems are. We can't just let them go. And one other thing, if you want to stop the flow from the prison to the end, get on a jury. Stop getting out of jury duty when we do not have a jury of peers. And that is the biggest flow, particularly in states like Florida, Texas, and California. We're not active on the jury. And so things get in that jury, but before then that are ridiculous. And there we go right down there. And that is one of the biggest budgets we have that's growing is federal prisons, jails. It is an industry, a big industry.
Thank you for that. I think all of us have underscored the importance of connecting to other organizations. And I would argue, even before you start your own organization, doing that work with the organizations that are doing the work. Learn what is going on in your community. Support what is going on in your community. We have a couple questions that I'm going to try to consolidate. One being that a member of, or an attendee is a part of a feminine-led, a female-led network of individuals committed to defunding police. I know that's a large conversation right now as a response, and I know it's a lot of tension around that, but I want to keep, this is a real talk session and integrity. Contextually, there are different meanings around defunding, and a lot of it is connected to reallocating to resources and organizations who are more equipped to do that work. But I think people are struggling with what organizations do they connect to? I hope you heard Aswad Walker. He named off some organizations. And I know we talked about court watching. Secunda, if you could drop in the Q&A where they can learn more about court watching, because I can't call that out off of memory. These organizations also are things that you can support with events. And so when we bring in these speakers, when we bring in people to educate, to facilitate that knowledge transfer, when HCC does it, come. And so when you think about how these organizations get funded, a lot of it is an event-based model. So you have to get connected to these organizations that are pouring into our communities. And then there's direct support that comes from organizations. So what is it that you're looking for? Is it direct support through funding of basic needs? Is it support of knowledge transfer? Is it support of being able to connect to who's doing the work so you can give your gifts to the work? It just really depends on where you are trying to land. A lot of what happens first is that discovery. We have to learn where we are. We have to learn why we're angry. We have to learn where our gifts can add value. And sometimes you have to do that through doing the work. And if you find that isn't your place, and you go to another organization with another mission that aligns with the work that you want to do, it's not one answer. I wish that it was. It just was not. I think I just answered that myself. So I think the next question that people are struggling with is, we talked a little bit about voting. And then there's this other response that we see very often about writing our congressman. And is that as worthwhile as voting? What do you all, and I don't know really who would speak to this question. Is anyone familiar with a response that's worked when we put pressure on elected officials? I'm going to cut to Secunda for that one.
So you have what you call strategy and you have tactics. Tactics can be anything. Is it writing to the congressman? Sometimes, right? You seen at this last at City Hall last time, over 300 people got on the mic with online, and some people came to City Hall to say either defund the police, they were saying abolish the police, and they were saying hold off on the vote, just don't increase the budget. I think unifiedly that is what all the people were saying in one voice, but you see that nothing happened, right? The city, our mayor and the city council did what they chose to do, right? So that particular tactic didn't necessarily work, but that doesn't mean it's over, right? So in terms of like those things work, you have to do many things, right? But I think it's about doing what's comfortable to you. When you hear organizations saying, hey, we want y'all to sign up to speak at City Hall, we want folks to write to Congress, what they're saying is we need these politicians to hear that it's not just me, the organizer, that's telling people to do that. we all want change, but I can't ask for it for myself. We need your voice. So yeah, it's a tactic. It's helpful, but is that the entire strategy? Is that going to necessarily get us where we need to do? That's one thing. Sometimes that one thing doesn't do anything. It's, you know, people are not imaginative and we not creative, and we just do what we know to do first, right? But if you are with the organization and somebody is asking, hey, would you call? If it doesn't do you no harm, you know, if you, know and understand what you're asking for, if your consciousness is in line with that thing, then keep calling. It's helpful. But if not, if you got questions, it's okay. You know, you don't have to. It's one tactic in like what should be a huge strategy for us, like getting free in whatever area that is.
Thank you for emphasizing that it's not isolated. That is, we're not facing isolated incidents, and there's not a singular response. And I think we have to own that. And I appreciate you sharing that you all and the groups that you're connected to showed up to city council. But you're saying it didn't work, but you learned from it. You strategize, you're saying, okay, next time we need to do something a little differently. Maybe we know who we need to talk to differently next time. And so all effort is valuable, right? And so we just have to think about that. I think a lot of what we've talked about and what people have been asking about has gone back to education. We have two questions rooted, and there are a lot of people who didn't grow up, the melanated and the melanated, learning Black history in their homes, and that it's, and calling out that it wasn't taught in elementary or high school. I talked a little bit about organizations that are bringing people in. Specifically, my mom's organization, Honey Brown Hope Foundation, does something called History Talks, where we bring, when I was in high school, you had to go find a World War II veteran. I think I'm telling my age right now, and you had to do a report. But but we are losing this whole crop of civil rights leaders, and that authentic history of hearing it from them first. So what she does with her organization is she brings in leaders from the movement, and we bring them into these campuses, and we've had a lot of success around bringing in civil rights leaders to that. I think you look for that. We brought it into the Children's Museum. You look for things during Black History Month. You look for things during Juneteenth, and you're intentional about taking the time to not only watch for yourself, but to bring your babies, to bring your family members, to see that there are virtual events going on. We will have a playback of this event. There's a playback of the event on Tuesday. Be intentional about setting aside that time when you hear something. You may not know everything that's going on, but when you hear something that's going on, connect to it and glean from it what you can glean from it. It's so vitally important to accept that we cannot solely rely on the classroom for education, that there's work that has to be done outside of that, that there's work that has to be done in our roles and how we show up in professional spaces. My soul is encouraged by Desmond just taking that on in that moment and saying, I have this position. A lot of people on this panel talked about their mentorship of who poured into them and who they are pouring into. I know Dr. Carter personally does that with doctors across the country. And Aswad is doing that in all of his roles. I want you all to take something back from everything that this panel poured into you, and share one piece of knowledge that you gleaned from this. Transfer that knowledge across generations. There are voices from the movement, from every movement, that you can glean from and learn from. And with that, we are so excited that you decided to tune in with us today. We will be following up with the recording, and I want to thank HCC and Student Life for making this possible. And I want you all to look out for the response as an institution We're doing what we're going to say we're going to do. Some of it's being led by Desmond, some of it is being led by faculty senate and student life, and other members of the institution. We are so excited to have had you. I want to thank all of our panelists, and Dominique Brown and Jim Jackson on the back end, and Ashley Rose, who's been feeding me these questions. Y'all have an amazing Juneteenth tomorrow. Commemorate it as a call to action for freedom, equality, and anti-racism. Y'all have a good weekend.